Damn you women, it's all your fault. There's not enough babies. And I think the reason is we have determined is because of abortion, contraception, hypergamy. Women want all the top guys. And there could be some environmental changes because of our society that are reducing the sperm count. So something must be done. We got to pass laws. We need more babies. I'm not really describing now, though. I'm not describing now. I'm not describing 2023. I am describing the conditions in Rome in 18 BC, 18 years before the birth of Christ. They had a problem that the Romans were having babies. And Caesar Augustus, he passed a law that if you don't get married and you don't have children, you pay a higher tax. And it was a huge issue. And it was interesting because it didn't work. About 30 years later, they passed another law, and it would be called like an anti-incel law. They had an incel problem, and they're like, you can't be an incel. You got to have sex with women. And so they penalized that to be celibate. Seriously, they did this in Rome because they had such a problem. And it was interesting because people look back on it and they're like, why did Rome have such a low birth rate at the time? I mean, they were a prosperous empire at that point. They were dominant, but they just weren't having babies. And part of the reasons cited were they had contraception, and abortion, although it wasn't that common and wasn't that effective, but it did exist and it was blamed. And they blamed the selfish nature of women not wanting to have children and just the nature of society, men just wanting to play around and not get married. So the more things change, the more they're really the same. We have the same issues. And by the way, passing those laws, it didn't really help anything. And eventually Rome was destroyed hundreds of years later. But primarily why it was destroyed is they ran out of Romans. Romans wouldn't reproduce. And this is a topical topic at the moment. Elon Musk has brought it up, and a lot of people are talking like, well, what's the issue? What's the issue? And a lot of people are blaming women because of birth control or because, oh, women are selfish. They want to go out and party and have fun. They don't want to have kids. And then there's the issue of hypergamy. Women just want the top guy, so they're too picky. And by the time they have a child, they're like in their 30s, so they can't. You need at least two kids to replace the population. So maybe they have one kid if they're lucky. By that age, they may not be able to get pregnant. So, and then you have the whole, oh, it's the plastics, the soy. And it's interesting. In the historians, in many cases, they blame, oh, the reason Rome they couldn't reproduce is because of lead poisoning. And there was a article in 1985, a study that they thought it was a hot bath, that Romans loved hot baths. So maybe that reduced sperm count. And I think it's all nonsense. And I have to admit that even my reasons for low fertility, I'm probably wrong. I always used to say the reason we have such a low birth rate is we don't breed in captivity and people don't see a future for our people. So why would you want to bring a child into a world when things look pretty grim? They're going to be hated because of their race or whatever. And I used to go with that, but it doesn't really add up because the Romans, they weren't in that situation. They weren't hated because of who they were. In fact, they're in the top of the world, and they still didn't have children. And if you look at today, do people really not have kids for that reasons? You get a couple of shit libs, they both make a couple 100,000 a year, but they don't have any children. And it's not because of some big political reason like, oh, it's because our child won't be loved in this world. That could be an excuse, but I really don't think that's what causes it. What seems to cause it, if you look at this, is prosperity and civilization. And this is almost of all people. We see this in Japan. Japan, they used to have tons of kids. They're not reproducing. Korea, the same way. All of Europe is not reproducing anymore. And Africa is still producing a ton, but they're very poor. And it's interesting because when you get populations into a prosperous environment, their fertility crashes. Like we used to always say, Mexicans have tons of kids, But when they come to the United States, their fertility drops once they become more prosperous. We see that with Africans too. So, in a strange way, as we get civilization, as we get prosperous, we don't reproduce ourselves. And it's almost like this weird trap we're in. It kind of reminds me of the theme of the movie 2001 Space Odyssey. I just happened to be looking at a review of it. I love that movie. They couldn't make that movie today because most people wouldn't understand it. It wasn't the typical Hollywood movie. It was more of a philosophical movie. But really, the whole premise of it was because of our minds, we were able to develop technology that put us on the top of the food chain with the use of a tool, like with a club. And because of that, we were able to dominate the world. And eventually, the simple bone club became nuclear weapons. And it was almost to our undoing. Like pretty soon, our weapons would actually destroy all of humankind, which is ironic because of us using our minds to create simple weapons, we were able to prosper, but it went so far that was our undoing. And in 2001 Space Odyssey, we had to go through another stage of evolution to overcome that. And in the same way, I think we're in the same trap with civilization, meaning the more prosperous we become and the more civilized we become, we do not replicate ourselves. And I think the reason for that is not because of birth control or abortion, because the Romans had primitive birth control, didn't work that well. And they had abortion, but it was risky. That didn't reduce their birth rates. And you can blame all these environmental stuff like, oh, we're also soy now. Well, the Romans weren't soy, they were pretty tough guys and they still had a low birth rate. And you could blame women, but that's just the nature that hasn't changed over the years. So the common thread seems to be civilization. And it seems to be that we as humans are biologically created or evolved to live in a certain way, meaning in small tribal communities. And in those circumstances, we tend to prosper genetically where we have children. And you see that all around, in the America in the 19th century, in the farmlands, people had lots of children, even though they were very poor. And we see this throughout the world. When people get more prosperous, they cease to reproduce themselves. And I don't know, the solution is kind of baked in the cake. Eventually, the civilization collapses and it becomes more primitive, and then people start reproducing again. That's kind of a rough way to do it, though. I think from a society point of view, we need to figure out somehow not to get rid of technology, but understand the dangers of technology and how it can totally destroy us. And in many ways, I'm becoming more sympathetic with Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber bomber and his manifesto. I used to really disagree with him, but the more I read his manifesto and his quotes, I think he was on to something. He had a quote. I found this very interesting. He said, the conservatives are fools. They whine about the decay of traditional values, yet yet they enthusiastically support technological progress and economic growth. Apparently, it never occurs to them that you can't make rapid, drastic changes in the technology and the economy of a society without causing rapid changes in all other aspects of society as well, that inevitably break down the traditional values. And I agree with them. That is, I think, what we see is when we evolve these technology and society. And I get it. I love that stuff too. But we as humans really aren't adapted to that. And it creates all sorts of screw ups. And I think we see this now with all the mental illness that we see out there. Just look on TikTok or your Twitter, all this weird sexual bizarre perversions where people don't know if they're a boy or a girl. That just didn't exist years ago. It didn't exist if you're like in a farm. This is a modern type of thing that is caused by abundance and civilization. And I'm not anti-civilization, but I think it's naive to think that you can keep progressing through your technology and there's not going to be any negative consequences to us as the biological humans. Because again, we're an animal. This is how we're designed, and we're almost going beyond what we're supposed to live like. And it makes people, I think, extremely unhappy. This women tend to be unhappy now. They're not living a natural life that they were created by God or nature to live. They're created to be mothers, have families, raise them. Men are created to provide and be part of communities and have meaning. Now everyone's isolated, and women, they're having sex with different guys and drinking a lot and taking a lot of drugs, and men are unhappy, and there's no sense of family. There's a breakdown. Even though we have all our toys and gadgets, it's just collapsing the civilization. There's no future. There's no children. So again, as a society, and I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer how to solve this, but somehow in a future ideal society, we're going to have to limit technology. I mean, there could be just little things we could do right away. I think would be a good thing. Like I would like to see children not be exposed at all to social media until they're 18 years old. Ban that 100%. I would ban computers from classrooms, make children use books and use paper and pencil. I really believe that, and have them be outdoors more and learn basic skills. And I think we need to focus on local communities more, in our families more, and don't try to see that we're part of this global humanity. That's all bullshit. We're not designed to be part of global humanity. You're designed to be part of a local community and a family and extended families. This global diversity is a nightmare. It won't work. It just creates fiction and insanity. We need to have smaller units, and I think what we need to do in our own lives, and I try to remind myself of this, is sometimes we have to get away from all the technology and all the strife. Like, why should I be upset about what's happening 6,000 miles away in Gaza? That's so unnatural. Those aren't my people. They're two warring tribes I shouldn't have to give a shit about. I should focus on the people in Arkansas, and not all of Arkansas, just like Northwest Arkansas, or even smaller, my local community. And I think that's how we all need to do it more so than instead of having this global perspective. So I it's hard for me to come to this realization because I've changed my own point of view because I always blame low birth rates. Well, else because we're oppressed and the government, bad tax laws, and there's no future to our people. But I don't really think it's that. I think it's just prosperity, and this level of technology doesn't lead to us to live as we're designed as human beings to live. It's artificial and unnatural, and it's pleasurable, but it's not really how we're designed, which in the long run leads to misery. Just some thoughts today. It's good to be back, guys. I'll talk to you guys later.